Okay, welcome back. Now we're going to talk about the Team Two's commentary on Team One's initial presentation, as well as the response to commentary. So we'll treat both of those sections in this video. So hopefully you've had an opportunity to watch that section of the video, and we'll go through these sections each one at a time. And I'm just going to talk through some of my responses and have a couple of reminders here about scoring. So I was very pleased with some of what I heard in the commentary, especially the idea of broadening out the conversation. One of the things I noticed that the team did is sort of zero in on the fact that the question was about problems of consumer culture, but that the initial presenting team mainly treated it as an issue of sort of the sweatshop industry, and in particular sort of as related to fashion and garment production, and that they turned it into a question of the lack of satisfaction that might come from this sort of consumer mentality. You know, I have a philosophy background. I appreciate Aristotle, so I didn't think that I didn't agree with everything that was said in terms of the way that Aristotle might think about happiness, but I think that's sort of over and above what I'm looking for as a judge in a environment such as this. So I thought that was a very strong part of the presentation. I think what was more complicated later in the commentary are some of the issues that were raised. So one thing that got brought up was the idea that this is not a consumer's responsibility, that it's a larger issue, and that didn't strike me as necessarily responding to the initial team, because the initial team seemed to make that point. And again, some of the later comments also seem to be about calling into question whether the consumer has any obligations at all in such a complex environment. And so some of these things seem to stray a little bit from directly speaking to the initial presentation. I think they can be really valid points, but maybe just need to be framed as such. And what I mean by that is saying, okay, we understand what your presentation was, and now we want to carry that conversation forward a little bit to ask some additional questions. I wasn't sure that they had framed it exactly that way. So again, I thought part of the commentary was very strong, sort of pointing out something that was missing and trying to take us back to the initial question. And then some of the other parts of it didn't necessarily speak as much to the initial presentation, although they brought up some good points. So I'm going to give this a 7. And this is an important point as a reminder, is just that remember that if you would have given them an 8 or a 6, that's fine as long as you're consistent. And you almost want to have this narrative inside your head that I'm engaging in out loud, so that you've got an understanding of why exactly you gave the score that you did, in case you ever needed to justify that score, which no one will ask you to, but it's good to be able to feel like you know exactly why you gave that score. So now we move on to the response to the commentary. And again, I thought there were some real strong points here. I think that what you noticed is that one of the members of Team One, I believe it was Avery, really said, I think you sort of maybe misunderstood us, because in fact we had talked about the fact that we don't think this is an issue of consumer responsibility, and we do think it's a larger thing. So sort of directly responding to a point in a way to say, well, you failed to actually be responding to us originally. So I thought that was a strength. The other main part of the response to the commentary focused on this idea of the notion that some things aren't valid choices because we don't say we choose not to murder. It's just taken as obvious. And I thought that was an interesting point. I think might have missed some of the thrust of what the commentary team was saying. It seemed to me that the commentary team was saying, that one of the things we need to ask about when we're talking about the moral dimensions of consumer culture is just the lack of happiness produced by the consumer behavior of engaging in these kinds of behaviors, constantly consuming more shorter term resources. And it seemed like the initial team didn't really address that head on. And the theme that I've picked up in the initial team's conversation so far is that it's very, very much focused on treating the case as if this is a case of the garment industry and its use of sweatshop labor, and not necessarily as the larger issue of the way consumers and consumer culture might play a role here, and just materialism in general. So I thought, strong point that Avery brought up, that the commentary team sort of maybe misunderstood them, but then I thought sort of an opportunity missed a little bit to welcome the broadening of the conversation. So again, I would give that a 7. So now what we'll do is we'll stop here. The next section of the next video will treat the next section of the match, which is the judges' Q&A. And so what you might think about, you might take a moment and rewatch what you've heard so far in terms of the initial presentation, the commentary and response to the commentary, and sort of jot down a few questions you might have as a judge. You can compare them to the questions you actually hear from the judges, and then you sort of use the questions you hear to sort of think about what scores you would give, especially if you were in the position of the judges that you hear asking the questions. All right, we'll see you in the next video.